What's up guys, Agent here again with another build video, and today we're going to be going over the Magicka Sorcerer. This is the double lightning staff version of the non-pet build. So this is for those sorcerers out there who still want to use two lightning staves and don't want to necessarily swap over to inferno staves for whatever reason, whether that's because you prefer lightning staves or just because you don't have an inferno maelstrom staff or something like that, but do have a lightning maelstrom staff. Generally speaking, this particular build will pull pretty similar DPS compared to a double inferno staff build. At least throughout my solo self-buff testing, I've found that they pull pretty similar DPS, with the inferno build pulling slightly ahead from time to time. But on average they're pulling about the same DPS. So regardless of whether you're doing double Inferno or double Lightning, you will be pulling very similar DPS between the two of them, with double Inferno having a higher ceiling, generally speaking. So the Magicka Sorcerer, again, a very useful class to have in any sort of raid. In terms of DPS, they do fall short of Magicka Nightblades, and they also do fall short of Magicka Wardens when they use their Bear ultimate. Magicka Sorcerers are really there as a reliable range DPS class, as well as an access to an additional synergy through the Liquid Lightning Conduit synergy for Alkosh uptime. But regardless, they're still a very strong option when it comes to range DPS, beating out to the Magicka Templar and the Magicka Warden when they don't have the Bear out. So, like all our other build videos, we'll be going over gear, attributes, CP points, skill bars, everything that we need to know in order to make this build successful. I'll be talking about a rotation, kind of what goes on through the rotation, and then we'll close things off with a 6-man dummy parse so you guys get an idea of the DPS we are able to pull using this particular build. Now, without further ado, let's go ahead and get started here with our gear. So for our gear, our monster helm, you actually have two options here. So you can either go with Skoria, like I have here, or you can go with the tried and true Ilambris. It's kind of dependent really on your personal preference. If you're going with Ilambris, you will need to have a health enchant on a large piece here. So you can see here I have a health enchant on my Ilambris head. And you do need heavy medium because we are using Siroria on our body, and Siroria only comes in light, so we will need heavy and medium combinations of monster helm sets for this particular setup here. So Skoria will let you use all Magicka enchants, but if you use Ilambris, then you will need to put a health enchant on one of your large pieces in order to get to an acceptable health threshold level. Whichever one you choose is going to really depend on which enchant you want on your front bar here. So if you want to go with a shock enchant and basically help out with better minor vulnerability uptime because your healers are not using infallible Aether or something, then you will be using Skoria because you won't have any source of fire damage to proc the fire portion of the Ilambris proc. But if you want to do a little bit more single target DPS and use the flame damage enchant instead, then you would be using Ilambris instead, because you will get a couple of the flame damage enchant, and that will push Ilambris just barely ahead of Skoria. But generally speaking, Skoria and Ilambris will pull very similar DPS. I just prefer to use Skoria because I like to have that shock damage enchant in order to help out our minor vulnerability uptime. Now for our first body piece, so this is the set that's going to be active on both bars. This is going to be Siroria. So we have the perfect version here. Siroria drops from Cloud Rest, so you will need access to the Summerset expansion in order to get this set. You can go with the perfect version or the imperfect version. Just make sure whichever set you want to use, you use 5 pieces of that set. As far as I'm aware, if you mix and match, then you will not. Sets won't count as pieces. So if you have, for example, 3 perfect and 2 imperfect, you would get the 2-piece bonus from the imperfect and the 3-piece bonus of the perfect version. So you do need all 5 pieces to be either all imperfect or all imperfect at this time. The perfect version, the difference between the perfect and imperfect version is just the addition of that max Magicka boost on the 5-piece bonus effect. So the perfect version has it, the imperfect version doesn't. The other 5-piece effect does not change between imperfect and perfect versions. Now for our armor traits, we have all the vines here. You can go with infused on your large pieces if you would like. It is a very small increase to your DPS, less than 0.5%. It's going to be about 0.1 to 0.2% increase in DPS if you have infused instead of divines on your large pieces here. For our second armor set, this is the set that's only going to be active while we're on our front bar. So we're going with Netch's Touch. This drops from Darksheet Caverns, which is the dungeon in Deshaun. So we have jewelry and the weapon. So you do need Netch's Touch weapons. I have 3 jewelry pieces here, but you can go with 3 body pieces and have your 3 Siroria jewelry instead. It really depends on how lucky you are with jewelry drops. In terms of traits, we have 2 Arcane and 1 Bloodthirsty. You can go with any combination of those 2, so you can go something like 3 Bloodthirsty, you can go 3 Arcane, you can do 2 Bloodthirsty, 1 Arcane. The DPS difference between all of them is going to be pretty small overall. Generally speaking, you do want a little bit, you kind of want to balance it out a little bit, because if you think about it, Bloodthirsty will not help you in the first 75% of the boss fight, while Arcane does help you out throughout the entire boss fight, but Bloodthirsty is a better DPS boost on the execute phase because of the additional damage that you're dealing, especially because you have the Mage's Wrath execute going on during the last 20% of the boss's health. For enchants, we have 1 Magicka Regen Glyph and 2 spell damage glyphs. We do need the Magicka Regen Glyph in order to help out our sustain. It's not quite necessary if we're going to be using balance. I'm using balance on my Sorks builds, so it's not absolutely necessary to have that Magicka Regen Glyph, but I do like it to have it so I don't have to cast balance as often as I would need to if I had 3 spell damage glyphs. But you can use 3 spell damage glyphs if you would prefer to do so. For our front bar weapon, we have infused with a shock damage enchant, and for our back bar, we have the Maelstrom's Lightning Staff infused with a weapon damage enchant. You can go with Nirnhone if you would like. It really depends on whether you're heavy attacking on your back bar or not. If you're heavy attacking on your back bar, then Nirn will be a little bit better for you as your back bar trait, but otherwise you'll be sticking with infused for the better single target DPS. So another option you could use instead of Netch's Touch, if you don't want to farm Netch's Touch, is to go with Mother's Sorrow. Mother's Sorrow is a dropped set from Deshaun. It is light armor, so you can, instead of going 3 jewelry, you can go with 3 body and mix and match however you'd like, as long as Siroria is active on both bars. And if you are going with Mother's Sorrow, you can actually get a named quest reward that is a lightning staff. If you go to the let me pull up this Deshaun map. I don't have destinations on, but over here in the right hand side of the map there is a Argonian village here, and if you finish the quest line here, I believe it's only 2 quests, it's very very short, you can finish it within 5 minutes, you will get a infused lightning staff of Mother Sorrow as a quest reward at the end of it, so you don't have to buy the infused lightning staff or farm for it. You can just finish the quest line here with a CP 160 character and you will be able to get that staff. So if you do want to use Mother Sorrow, I do recommend going that route if you would like. And that's pretty much it for in terms of gear here. So let's move on to our character sheet. I am a Breton, and that's just because I am on the PTS, and I like to ensure that my PTS characters are one-to-one to my live characters. Sorry. And my Sork on live is a Breton. However, the best race, if you're going to be going with this build, is going to be the Altmer, the High Elves, because they have better shock damage boost. So Bretons get 10% max Magicka, 3960 spell resistance, which helps out their survivability, and they get 3% cost reduction to Magicka abilities. Altmer, on the other hand, the High Elves, they get 10% max Magicka, 9% Magicka regen, and then they get 4% additional shock, flame, and frost damage. Another race you could potentially use is going to be the Dark Elves, the Dunmer. If you do swap back and forth between double Lightning and double Inferno staffs, then I would recommend sticking with the Dunmer, just because Dunmer is going to be the better race if you are going double Inferno. Dunmer have 9% max Magicka, they get 7% additional flame damage and 2% additional shock and frost damage. So those are your 3 primary options when it comes to race choice if you do want to optimize your race option. Now for our health, we have our attributes I should say, we have 64 points into Magicka. We don't have any points into health, and you can see here we're sitting at about 16.6, 16.7k max health. If you do feel like you're dying too often, if you want to give yourself a little bit more padding in terms of survivability, you can shift a couple of points from Magicka into health. I personally wouldn't recommend putting more than like 5 points or so into health there, just because you're going to start giving up a little bit too much damage from losing too much max magicka if you're putting more than that into health. It's kind of up to you how you want to play around with it. If you're very comfortable with fight mechanics, if you're very comfortable with your abilities to survive, then you don't need to put any points into health like I have here. For our Mundus stone, we are going with the Apprentice here. You can go with the Thief as well. The Thief is a little bit stronger than the Apprentice, especially if you are putting more points into Elfborn in terms of your CP trees, but they're both pretty similar on DPS. The Thief is only about half a percentage point better in overall DPS potential. So you can go with either of them. You can also go with the Lover if you would like, if you are still going to be below the penetration cap or at the penetration cap when you use the Lover. Now with the Lover, remember that the penetration cap is 18,200. So I usually use the Lover if we're not going to be having Alkosh in group. So this particular build is optimized around having all of our debuff sets active. So that's Infused Thorax Crusher and that's Alkosh in the group. If we don't have Alkosh, then you will probably need to use the Lover in order to get the penetration cap, because you do need to make up that 3,000 loss of penetration from not having Alkosh out. That's something to keep in mind as well. We'll rediscuss this when we go over our CP point distributions. As long as you're not going over the penetration cap of 18,200 by too much, so like going over by like 200 or so is fine, but if you're going over by anything more than I'd say like 500 or 600 penetration, then I would reconsider running the Lover there, or if you have 7 Divines pieces, you might want to like swap out your large pieces for Infused or something like that, so you are not having as much penetration from the Lover that way. So you just have to play around with your kind of Mundus stones, your CP points, and your armor traits until you manage to get up to the penetration cap. Now for our abilities, starting off with our front bar, we have Crystal Frags. Elemental Weapon is going to be our main spam build. You can use Force Pulse or Crushing Shock instead if you would like. Elemental Weapon is going to be better overall for your sustain. It does deal less damage, but it also costs less magicka, so it's going to be better for our sustain overall. We have Bound Aegis, Mage's Wrath, Inner Light, and then we have the Destra Ulti Thunderous Rage here. That's just to maintain our Ancient Knowledge passive. That's pretty important passive to maintain here. For our back bar, we have Haunting Curse, Liquid Lightning, Balance. This is here for not just for the major resistance buffs, but also for our sustain as well. Blockade of Storms, and this is where we would put our shield. I like to have Empowered Ward, but you can go with the other morph, which is Hardened Ward. It really depends on which one you'd like. Hardened Ward will give you a bigger shield overall compared to Empowered Ward, but Empowered Ward is going to be cheaper for you. Doesn't shield you by as much, but it also grants minor intellect as well, which boosts your magicka regen, so it's really nice to have there. So I would probably recommend going Empowered Ward instead of Hardened Ward. You could also use the Light Armor Shield's ability, Harness Magicka or Dampen Magic. However, your Sorcerer Shield, your Hardened Ward and Empowered Ward are going to be a stronger shield overall, especially Hardened Ward. Dampened Magic will give you a larger shield compared to Empowered Ward, but it doesn't give you the minor intellect boost, and it also costs almost 1k more magicka. So that's something that you want to take in consideration there. So I would recommend just going with the Sorc Shield Empowered Ward instead of the Light Armor Shield there. For the purposes of our parse, we'll be going with Elemental Drain, however. And then we have the Greater Storm Atronach. This is, you basically have two options here when it comes to ultimates. So you can go with the Greater Storm Atronach if you want single target DPS. In addition, it also provides a melee DPS, or any DPS really, with Major Berserk for 8 seconds, which really helps out their DPS. Or if you need the additional cleave damage, if you're fighting a boss with ads or something like that, or you are doing trash, then you can go with the Destra Ulti instead, because the Destra Ulti does have a lot more cleave damage compared to the Greater Storm Atronach. For the purposes of our parse, we will be going with the Storm Atronach ultimate throughout the entire parse, including our first ultimate starting off. Now for our CP points, the CP cap is now 750, which means we have 250 points to put across the 3 different constellation colors. So starting off with our green CPs, we have 75 into Arcanist, 75 into Tenacity. That gives us 100 points, remaining points, which you can put into the remaining nodes however you'd like. It really depends on what kind of passives you want from the different constellations, as well as a specific trial you're running. So for example, you might need to use Break Free more often in certain trials, so you might want to invest more points into that node compared to the other nodes. Personally, I have 40 into Shadow Ward, 31 into Tumbling, and 29 into 29 into Warlord here. But again, you can distribute them however you'd like. For example, if you want a Treasure Hunter passive, then put 75 points into these two nodes here, and then put the remaining 25 elsewhere into some other node. Now for our blue CPs, like I mentioned earlier, I am particularly optimized around having Alkosh and Infused Torx Crusher in the group, so I have all of my debuff sets active. If you do not have those debuff sets active, then you will need to shift some CP points around in order to get up to the penetration cap. So right now you can see here I have 11 points into Spell Erosion, but if I don't have, for instance, Torx Infused Crusher, or I don't have Alkosh, I might need to run the Lover, and I might need to reevaluate whether I need to put more points into Spell Erosion or not. It's really dependent on each particular group, how many debuffs you have, things like that. So if you do need to put more points into Spell Erosion, then I would start taking out of Elfborn first, drop that down to 56. You can drop Elemental Expert down to 56. You can take out of Staff Expert first, and then you can probably leave Thaumaturge and Master at Arms alone if you can help it, and put points into Spell Erosion until you hit the penetration cap. So it's really going to be varying dependent on each group. For this particular setup though, we have 11 points into Spell Erosion, 61 into Elfborn, 64 into Elemental Expert, 23 into Staff Expert, 40 into Master at Arms, and 51 into Thaumaturge. Now for our red CPs, I like to take a one-size-fits-most approach, so it's going to give me a more balanced damage mitigation. However, depending on how comfortable you are with the trial and the specific trial that you are running, you might want to shift some CP points around in order to best maximize your complete damage mitigation from the damage you're taking in that trial. So for example, if you're running, let's say, Maw of Lorcage, you're taking more magical damage, so magic damage, flame damage, those kind of damages compared to physical damage. So it might be more beneficial for you to invest more heavily into spell mitigation compared to physical mitigation if you're going to be running Maw. For the balanced approach, I have 66 into Ironclad, 56 into Thick Skin, and 64 into both Hardy and Elemental Defender. Now I do want to point out one passive that you might want to consider picking up, and that's going to be the Field Physician passive. So while you're resurrecting another player, you reduce the damage you take by 15%. So you can basically put 11 points into Bastion or Quick Recovery, and you'll be able to hit the next jump point there and gain the Field Physician passive. As a Magicka DPS, especially as a Sorc, because your shields are going to be a little bit larger compared to other Magicka DPS classes, you might be the first person to go for any sort of resurrections. So it is useful to have the Field Physician passive there, because the damage reduction does also impact the damage that your shield takes as well. So it's really nice to have this passive here, so that way you don't die while you're resurrecting somebody. It's just really nice to have, so I do recommend you pick it up, particularly if you're in a progression style guild. So that's pretty much it for all of the build stuff. So now let's go ahead and talk about our rotation. So we'll head over here to the demonstration dummy, so you guys can get an idea of what the rotation looks like. So the first thing I do want to mention here is the order in which you're going to lay your back bar dots. So ignoring Haunting Curse for now, because Haunting Curse can be thought of as a basically like a 12-second duration here. So the first hit happens after 3.5 seconds, the second hit happens after 8.5 seconds. Add them up, that's basically a 12-second dot. So Haunting Curse is going to be kind of the dynamic dot that we're putting down, and we're going to be bar swapping and reapplying it whenever it falls off. So we don't really consider that as part of our fixed rotation, or the fixed part of our rotation. So the fixed part of our rotation is going to be Liquid Lightning and Blockade of Storms. Now Liquid Lightning has a 10-second duration, and Blockade of Storms has an 8-second duration. So you do want to cast Liquid Lightning and then Blockade, so that way they both run out at around the same period of time here. So if you can see here, Liquid Lightning will run out, and then Blockade immediately right afterwards. So when we reapply our dots here, for example, so let's say we're DPSing here, and we're going, and we're going, and we're going. Now we know we have to reapply our dots soon. So we bar swap back, do Liquid Lightning and then Blockade, and that basically helps to minimize the downtime between Blockades. Now if you do Blockade and then Liquid Lightning like this, Blockade's going to run out, and then you have 2 seconds left in Liquid Lightning. which is a little bit awkward here. So for example, we need to reapply Blockade, and then reapply Liquid Lightning. And if you guys noticed on the timers above my resource pools, I reapply Blockade, I reapply Liquid Lightning. I still had about 2 seconds left on Liquid Lightning. So that ends up is what we call overcasting. So you're not letting the dot run completely out before you reapply the dot. Generally speaking, that's going to be a little bit harder on your sustain because you're not basically you're casting the ability early as opposed to kind of on time or even late. So it is going to be a little bit harder on your sustain. So that's something that you just want to keep in mind. So instead of going Blockade, Liquid Lightning, you want to go Liquid Lightning and then Blockade. Then on your front bar, you do want to use your Crystal Frag procs as soon as it goes off. So our back bar rotation going to look like this. So if you want to reapply Haunting Curse, if it's not already up, you can light weave your spam bowl. So whatever Crystal Frags goes off, that you see that proc, you do want to use the proc right away. So that way you're not sitting on it. You see Quantum Curse expired, went off. So we swap to our back bar, we reapply it, and then depending on how much time we have left on Liquid Lightning and Blockade, we will reapply them, or we will swap back to our front bar and basically continue with our spam bowl. Generally speaking, if you have around like 3 seconds left on Liquid Lightning or something like that, when you swap to reapply Haunting Curse, it's better off just to stick to your back bar and just reapply your entire back bar rotation, and then go back to your front bar. So like I was saying with the Crystal Frag procs, as soon as you get one, you want to use it right away. So that way you're not what we call sitting on the frag proc. Because if you're sitting on the proc and you continue to use a spam bowl, you can see that the action duration reminder basically renewed itself. So we basically wasted our first proc because the second proc actually erased that first proc, so to speak. So by using that proc right away, we're basically opening up ourselves for a second proc and not have to worry about the first proc being consumed by a second proc happening. Now there might be an occasion where you have the proc go off right when you need to do your back bar rotation, so basically when you need to reapply Liquid Lightning and Blockade. You pretty have two options here when it comes to that. You go with the proc, let the proc go off and bar swap from the proc, and then reapply your Liquid Lightning and Blockade and have a little bit of downtime on your dots. Or you can ignore the proc, finish off your back bar rotation, and then right when you swap to your front bar, you open up with a with consuming that Crystal Frag proc. So that's kind of the two school of thoughts there. I personally, generally speaking, will keep the proc while I'm applying my back bar dots and then just use it right when I swap over to my front bar. Now in terms of when you want to use balance, that's going to be kind of dependent on how well you're able to sustain in a raid. Generally speaking, you will want to use balance every time you're on your back bar or every other time on your back bar. You don't want to go any more than that, so like every other time is a pretty safe bet for using balance in order to help sustain. But again, it's going to vary depending on how many orbs you're able to get, how well your healers are with giving you basically orbs or shards in order to sustain yourself, as well as any heavy attacks that you are doing as well in order to help sustain yourself as well. Generally speaking though, you do want to keep an eye on your health when you do use balance because it does consume health. You can see there, drop my health. It takes about 30% of your health more or less, so it's about 6k health. In a raid, it's not going to be that big of a deal because you will be getting heals through healing springs and orbs and everything like that, but that's something you do want to keep in mind there. You don't want to necessarily use balance right before like a unavoidable damage hit. For example, when Rakat is slamming, basically swapping pads, and you have the unavoidable hit there. You don't want to use balance but right before he does it, because you'll drop your health down and you might die because you did lose that health. One thing to keep in mind too is when you use balance, it reduces the strength of your damage shield by 50%. So if your ward, for example, gives you a 14k shield, you use balance if you use the shield again within 4 seconds of using balance, then you only have a 7k shield instead. So that's something you want to also be mindful of when you decide to use balance. Are you going to need to use your shield right away? Because if so, it's going to be weaker than usual. So with all of that kind of in mind, we're going to go ahead and do our 6-man dummy parse. I will try to narrate throughout the parse so you guys can get an idea of what's going on while I'm doing the parse, and then we'll take a look at our combat metrics report and kind of look over what we did well, what we could have done better with the parse in general. I do have enough spell power potions to make it through the parse. I have 4 left, and like I said, we will be going with only the greater Storm Atronach as our ultimate. We will not be using the Desert Staff ultimate at all. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So we do have some downtime on our dots here. Oh, something I forgot to mention as well, you can bar swap cancel out of the balance animation, like for example right here, or not right here. I'll show you guys an example of that. These are ultimate. So this is an example of bar swap canceling out of the balance. You hit balance, then you can basically just bar swap out of the animation. You basically bar swap cancel out of almost all of your back bar skill animations, so balance, hunt and curse, blockade, those are the primary ones you're going to want to swap cancel. We're going to do curse, our ultimate, and then we're going to do our 2 dots. So I do like to go into execute here with around 30%, usually a little bit more max Magicka. So for execute, we do drop Haunting Curse. We will not be using Haunting Curse. And then you do want to use Crystal Frag procs every 20 seconds in order to maintain your Minor Prophecy buff. Alright. So I didn't really talk about execute too much. So for execute, we do drop Haunting Curse, so we will not be using Haunting Curse at all, and we will not be using Crystal Procs right when they happen anymore, just because Mage's Wrath hits harder than Crystal Frags, as you guys will see in the parse here. So Crystal Frags here you can see hits for max 31k, and then Mage's Wrath hits for about 30.7, so it's not that big of a difference here. So we do just keep on using Mage's Wrath. We will not be using Crystal Frags at all, mainly because also Crystal Frags does have a cast bar associated with it for some reason, so using Crystal Frags actually ends up being a DPS loss compared to just spamming Mage's Wrath. In addition, Mage's Wrath does help proc our Implosion passive there as well. And so we do still want to keep using Crystal Frags because of the the exploitation passive. We do want to use one at least every 20 seconds in order to maintain our spell crit. So what I typically do is I typically try to use 1 Crystal Frag proc during execute every second blockade I put down, just because that is about 16 seconds or so. It's not quite as necessary if you have another Sorc also running a spammable build with Crystal Frags, but you do want to keep that in mind. You do want to try to maintain this Minor Prophecy buff, not just for you, but for also everybody else every other Magicka DPS in the group for that additional spell crit. Now looking over our combat metrics report, we did 36.6k. See here, light attacks pretty strong here. Liquid Lightning and Blockade of Storms. We did have some downtime here. So it says we were in combat for 259 seconds, which is, I don't believe that is correct at all. It seems like Commetrics report here is being a little bit silly right now. So 200, so we have down here in the live timer here 244, so that's actually 164 seconds instead of however much it told us, 259. So 164 seconds, so we should have around 164 ticks of Liquid Lightning and Blockade of Storms. We don't have that. I pointed out that I was dropping my dots a little bit too much, so I could do a little bit better on maintaining these dots here. And then in terms of light attacks per second, or light attack ratio, Sorks are going to have a little bit lower compared to Nightblades, just because we do have the Crystal Frag proc that we have to deal with. So 145 over 164 is about 0.88, so that's pretty good. It's a little bit hard for Sorks in order to get up to 0.9. It is possible to do so. I've done it before, but it is harder because of the Crystal Frag procs having some sort of hidden cast timer associated with it. Then you can see here, like I mentioned, Crystal Frags and Mage's Wrath. This is why we would drop Crystal Frags during Execute, because of that cast timer and because it hits approximately the same here. And you can see Malcolm Skoria does a decent amount of DPS here. It does about 1.3k DPS here. Now if we take a look at our... okay, so we can't see debuffs out here. Let me see if I have a saved fight. I don't think I have a saved fight at all. I do not have a saved fight for charge weapon. Oh wait, yes I do. I believe this is a saved fight here. Let's see. Oh no, is it this one? So I don't have a saved fight with a shock damage enchant, but generally speaking, your debuff uptime, your minor vulnerability uptime is going to be sitting around 60 to 70% when it comes to using a shock enchant over a flame enchant. So with the flame, you're sitting at around 45-ish, and with the shock damage enchant, you're going to be sitting a little bit higher. You're going to be sitting at around around 65 to 70%. So if you do take that into consideration, the additional minor vulnerability uptime, then you actually do end up doing about the same amount of DPS compared to Inferno. The Inferno does usually end up pulling slightly ahead when you take that into consideration. So that's something just you want to keep in mind when you want to compare the two parses between like a double Inferno staff build and a double Lightning staff build. You do want to keep in keep that into consideration, the minor vulnerability uptime there. You can see here with Siroria, we got the maximum uptime of about 88% on the full stack. In a more mobile fight, you will not necessarily be able to maintain all full stacks at all times, but as long as you're able to maintain anywhere between like 8 and 7 stacks on average, Siroria will do better than pretty much most other sets that you can put in the body piece. But if you aren't able to maintain any more than like 7 or 8 on average, then you might want to swap out Siroria for Moondancer instead. It's kind of up to you. Generally speaking, for most fights in the game, you will have no issues having at least 10 Siroria stacks on average in a fight. So that's pretty much it when it comes to taking a look at our buffs and our debuffs. We can't do debuffs because Commetrics bugged out on us, and we took a look at our Commetrics parse and everything already there. So that is it for this build video. If you guys have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them down in the comment section below, and I will try to get back to them as soon as I can. Hope you guys found this video informative, and I will see you guys in the next dungeon.